being able to realize at the end of the day that these are people who have interesting lives and you have an opportunity to learn from them, and you just need to make sure that what you're speaking about, it inside and out. You earn their respect and vice versa.
You're listening to Prospecting on Purpose, where we discuss all things prospecting, sales, business, and mindset. I'm your host, Sara Murray, a sales champion who's here to show you that you can be a shark in business and still lead with intentionality and authenticity. Tune in each week as we dive into methods to connect with clients, communicate with confidence, and close the deal. Lauren Ashley Smith is a seasoned real estate professional with 20 years of experience in commercial real estate transactions, including investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, and strategic advisory. As a director and founding member of a boutique New York City investment bank, Lauren played a crucial role in the third largest real estate transaction in global history. Lauren has advised clients on real estate leasing, acquisition, and sales at CBRE and Cushman & Wakefield, executing transactions across the globe. She's provided M&A advisory and strategic advisory for private equity funds, operators, developers, REITs, institutional advisors, and tech companies. And now, in the renewable energy sector, Lauren serves on the board of directors for TVCE Energy, a firm focused on developing solar and other renewable energy power plants in Eastern Europe. I am extremely excited to have Lauren on the show. Lauren, welcome to Prospecting on Purpose.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
I'm so happy to talk to you today. I know we're going to learn so much. Before we kick off, you live in Manhattan, correct?
Yes.
So, first question, where's the best pizza in New York City?
My favorite place is Ruby Rosa. It's located in the Lower East Side and Lower East Side, East Village area in Manhattan. And they're known for their tie-dye pizza. And it's amazing.
Is that like white sauce and red sauce together?
It's red sauce, but it has like a pesto tie-dye swirl that they put on top of the pie. And I don't know what is in it, but it is like crack. It's so good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, we'll have to check it out if you're in New York City. Let's start just at the beginning. Tell us about your early career.
So I started out in the industry of commercial real estate. My first role was in DC working for a company called Grubb & Ellis, which is no longer a company. But then I moved to New York and started working for Cushman & Wakefield, which is one of the larger commercial real estate service providers. And I did a ton of transactions where I was representing companies, but working directly with the C-suite. And at the time, it was a ton of financial institutions in New York City. So you're working with people who built hedge funds and were running multi-billion-dollar books of business in the finance sector. So I was right out of college and I was, wining and dining these folks, but also transacting and supporting major, major decisions for their company.
Wow. So how has that impacted your confidence and success with that role kind of leading to where you are today?
Yeah, I think that it really impacted my trajectory quite a bit because, I think a lot of people would look at, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in some version of a sales role. And then also I'm going to be working with the C-suite of the company. In some ways that could be very attractive to people and also very intimidating. And you think, oh my gosh, they're in their 50s, late 40s, sometimes even 60s and 70s, and they have so much experience. And, what am I going to talk to them about? Or how am I going to get them to make this major decision that's going to cost them millions of dollars and commit to a long-term, real estate decision for their business? And I think my experience working with, growing up in a family with a lot of people that were much older than me, older siblings, lots of other people that were lawyers and doctors, kind of pulling from my life experience and having a comfort level with people that are multiple generations older than me. I think that helped, but also just being able to realize at the end of the day that these are people who have interesting lives and, you have an opportunity to learn from them. And you just need to make sure that what you're speaking about, it inside and out. You earn their respect and vice versa.
I think that would be very intimidating for where I was out of college. One of the things that I would be interested in is when you are talking, there's big money on the line because it's big commercial real estate deals. You're working with people older than you. What are some of the tools that you use to connect? You mentioned your family and pulling from different references there. What are the different areas that you've pulled from to start to bond with these types of clients?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you take away all of someone's resume, you kind of just, they're still a human being that has life experiences. And, everyone likes to travel. I mean, being a female in a male dominated industry, you walk into a room and everyone wants to talk about the sports game or, something that's very male dominated. And so, yes, of course, as a female, young female in that space, I had to know those things. But I think also what I tried to do was to have unique conversation and not really try to pander to the boys club, but also make it, oh, someone different is in the room and I can have a unique conversation and they're not trying to be a part of this club. They're actually making this a more interesting meeting. And so I think what you can do is really humanize yourself and talk about your life experiences and try to find common ground with those people. And all you have to do is start asking a few questions. You can read body language and see what they're really interested in talking about. You can uncover that someone loves to sail and just start talking about that if you have experience with it. Or it could even be something. I was in a meeting recently and we're capital raising for my renewable energy business. And I was in a meeting and the potential capital partner is another generation or two older than me still. And he's dealing with having a brother who passed and now taking care of his child who's in high school and happened to be in a town where I have a lot of connections in near Detroit. And he was trying to get him into a school there and just being able to say, hey, I actually have a lot of relationships in that town. And, I know you don't know Bloomfield Hills in Michigan, and I'm happy to connect you. I mean, just kind of learning about what's going on in someone's life is a great way to have a more human conversation with someone. And I think being a woman, it's an advantage in a lot of ways if you play to it, because they're more likely to tell me about those kinds of things than they are maybe the other men in the room.
Yeah, I very much can identify with that as well. I think about not talking about the sports games is usually a breath of fresh air for people. Like they're bored about it too.
Yeah.
What you said is so important too, is leaning into some of that personal side of it. Because if you have some of the personal foundation, then the business transactions become a lot more seamless because you have that foundational. Why wouldn't I work with Lauren? She knows, what I'm going through personally. She can, she's offering to help me.
Yeah.
I call it the emotional bank account,
Yes. Love that.
different ways to kind of get little deposits in and then you can withdraw as needed.
Mhm.
That's all that sales is really just this emotional back and forth. And then ideally it leads to business.
Yeah, and I think it's important to really emphasize that sales is everywhere. It's in our personal relationships, it's cross-functionally in a company where you're only internally facing. I mean, my husband works at a big tech company and, you have to get something across the finish line, but you have to work with product, you have to work with sales, you have to work with your operations team, finance. I mean, there's so much cross-functional buy-in and decisions by committee that you're selling your project, you're selling your ideas, you're constantly selling your work stream cross-functionally. And I think that's really important to remember that sales isn't just about I'm selling you something and you're buying from me. It can apply to almost everything in our lives.
I could not agree with you more. And I think of the term like transactional selling, it's like transaction literally means just an exchange or an interaction between people. And it gets this like dirty connotation, or people think that they're excused from having to do it because they're not in a traditional sales role.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's just so much to learn from any type of relationship that you have. And I think that people miss the opportunity when they're with people that they don't see at face value are adding value to their lives or in the current moment. And I once worked with someone who said, I'm always respectful and good to everyone, even when I feel that they're not at my level or they're not really bringing anything to the table, because you never know when that relationship actually will mean something to you. It could, and it could also be that they just tell someone else, hey, you should talk to Sara because she is the best at selling. And you should listen to her podcast.
Thank you. And spread the word, everyone. I totally agree with you because one of the things that has shocked me the most about leaving my corporate job to start a business is some of the people that are coming out of the woodwork to help me, I would have never imagined, or former clients that started their own business. Now we're our own little coworkers, we'll call each other when we're making lunch just to check in. And I think about how you and I met. I was given this opportunity to approach a really big deal and my first project with my consulting firm. And it was way bigger than I would have ever expected, kind of the first one to be. And so I was making different phone calls, connecting the dots, and it led me to you. And you
Mhm.
really were a great support to me in the negotiation process, kind of how to manage this opportunity that was unique to me and something I had never negotiated before. And that deal ultimately didn't end up going through. But my biggest takeaway and value out of it is now my relationship with you, because now you're on the podcast. I so appreciate it. I know I can call you if I need help, and I know that you'll help me. And it's something that I want to be able to pay forward, and I try to, and every chance I get. But I think that it speaks so well to connecting the dots because you never know. And I'm so grateful for our friendship now.
Likewise, and I think the currency isn't always you do something for someone and they do something in return. Sometimes it's you help someone and then they help someone else, and that's the reward for me is, I'm always making sure that I'm available to help others that are trying to advance their career or work through a problem that I can be helpful with. And then when they help someone else and where they're experts, it just rewards me because it's just generosity, and generosity isn't monetary. It's all kinds of things. You're generous with your time, with your brain, your emotional bank as well. In terms of applying this to people who are on a sales track or in other tracks and advancing their career, but I think also just people need to kind of understand and take a step back to step one is being interested in other people. And if you're someone who you just cannot get interest in other people, you probably need to be in a very independent contributor type of role and then maybe kind of reflect and figure out, okay, well, I need to be interested in some ways about other people. But if you're someone who you can really lean into that and be interested and really kind of apply that, you have way more opportunities afforded to you through that.
I think that that's amazing. And I think you're right. And I think we're talking about career path in terms of like internal roles in your work, but this also applies to just humanity as a whole. Like, how do you treat your doorman? How do you treat the guy at the pizza shop?
Exactly.
When I think about some of your experience from a work angle and the types of conversations that you've had, I would imagine you've probably had to have some really delicate or confrontational or crucial, I don't know what word we want to use here, but you've probably had to navigate some very difficult conversations, I would imagine.
Yes. More than I probably want to relive.
We won't take you down the
No,
path.
no, no, no. I think that, yes, I've had to navigate a lot of different, we'll say intricate situations, personalities, dynamics, transactions that are super complex. And, it doesn't matter in my world, there's M&A, there's capital raise, there's so many different elements to what I've done in my career. But and everyone will say, oh, this is just business. This isn't personal or this isn't emotional. And it's just not true. I mean, everything is a personal connection you have to what you're working on. Or you're spending your time doing this. And so in that you get personality types, you get different ways of looking at something. Sometimes I say it's because I'm an exennial. And I think, in that generation, you kind of bridge the gap between the boomers and the young millennials and now the Gen Zs, and you kind of bring them all together. Also being that role in my family where I'm kind of in the middle of everybody, like generationally, you're used to trying to hear both sides, trying to work through to find the solution. And I think even when you're trying to get to know someone, it's important to know what really motivates them. And so when I'm working through a complex dynamic with my partners or in an acquisition on something, and the seller has some points that are very difficult for us to overcome in order to close the transaction, it's really just, you kind of just have to boil it down. What is motivating the other person in this dynamic? And what are their long term and short term goals? And it can be just as simple as you're working through who are we going to hire? And I don't necessarily want to hire this type of person, but you want to hire that type of person. So it costs to be much more complex, which is how are we going to close this large transaction? Or how am I going to get this client to sign on with me exclusively versus my competition who has way more experience than me? There's all these different types of situations that you just really have to sit back and boil it down to what is this person's goals? What are the broader goals? What are mine? And where can we align?
Is that an internal conversation, or do you ask your clients, like, what motivates you? What's your goal here? I mean, what's the balance there?
That's a really good question. And for for me, it's something I usually can figure out without having to ask it directly. But that comes with practice and a lot of data points on people, and you don't get it right all the time. So I think there's ways to get that answer without being explicit and linear about it, I like to say, which is, hey, Sarah, what is your goal of this podcast? Why are we here?
I mean, you did ask me that in our prep call. It's like, but it was
Yes,
great.
so sometimes you have to ask those questions because, you wanna make sure that you're addressing the issues that are important to them.
Totally.
But kinda have to you practice it, and if you're young in your career, you might sound like you're being too explicit by asking these direct questions, but I think it's always better to be open, transparent, direct than to kind of beat around the bush, and as you get older, these things kind of just, I shouldn't say older, as you have more data points, experience
Mhm.
doing it, you can kind of read between the lines, but it's always good to be transparent and open.
You and I had a call before this recording, and we were talking about any opportunity that you were presented with is an opportunity to learn something. Can we dig into the data point thought a little bit more? Because I think about, okay, data points from what's motivating that client or what they care about or what's their business model. What other data points can people think about as they're kind of building their like salesperson avatar?
Data points on how does someone make a decision. So there's different types of decision making that happens. Some people are very quick, and the decision they make in a quick instant is the same decision they're going to make whether they sleep on it or not, or they get more information. Some people need a lot of information before they make a decision, and they want to feel very informed about their decision. And other people, they just kind of want to mull over it. They want to just take the high level information and data, and then they want to spend some time meditating on it, we'll say. And they want to feel that they didn't make a quick decision. And so that's an example of a data point of knowing when you're in a conversation with someone, what type of decision maker is this person going to be? And the decision could be some people, like my partners, I have a partnership and there's four of us. And even though we have different economic interests in our partnership, we have to make unanimous. All business decisions are unanimous. So all four of us have to agree. That's really hard,
Mhm.
but that's the type of trust that we built with each other. But when I decided to enter into that partnership, I have to say, all right, how do each one of these people like to make decisions? And I have one of them that's like very quick. It's going to be the same decision no matter what. Another one wants to sleep on it. He says, I want to ruminate on it. And then my other one is a bit of a hybrid. He wants some data, he wants to get more data, and then he wants to talk about it and debrief one more time before he makes a decision. So I think that's kind of one example of how do you get enough data points of working with different types of people. And that's why I say, just because you think someone's inexperienced doesn't mean you can't learn something from them, because you're going to learn about how that type of person operates, what makes that person tick. And we shouldn't just be drawn to people who are just like us. We should be drawn to
Mhm.
people who have diverse intellectual backgrounds, professional backgrounds, emotional backgrounds, and learn, because that's going to make you more successful when you're interacting with other people, no matter what you end up doing in your life.
Wow, that was a perfect example. I have so many follow-up questions to that. One of the questions that I would ask you is if everyone has to make a decision unanimously and you all have different styles, have you had situations where one disagrees, but the group has to go through it together? I mean, I'm assuming there's support on your actions for your next steps because you're a partnership.
In the tech world, and I think mostly in the business world, there's an expression called disagree and commit. And so a lot of times you'll have decisions where you don't fully buy into the decision that's being made, but you realize that most everyone on the committee or your partnership does. And so you can make your case, and then you say, okay, I'm going to disagree and commit. I haven't had really many of those. I can't really think of one yet. I'm sure there will be. And sometimes you have to sidebar. You'll realize some people don't do well when you have all four sitting on a call or in a room and everybody has to come up with their decision. That person might need to have a sidebar with just one person and kind of get a talk through with one of the partners or someone else on the team, and then come back to the group setting. And so, to your question, you have to give people their space to get to the answer. And yes, it is hard in certain decisions. If let's just say we own an asset, a property, we own a renewable energy plant, and three of us think it's time to sell it. We've received an offer. Do we want to sell it? Some of us want to, some of us don't. And so how do you reconcile that? And yeah, I mean, look, you have legal agreements that give you outs, but generally speaking, we want to all agree because that's what creates a healthy partnership moving forward. And so you have to kind of work through it. These things are not easy. And that's why having more experience with working with various different people early in your career, the earlier you can get started, even if you're in high school, like just start working with all kinds of different people, try to expose yourself to many people in your community and other communities, because I think that's what gives you the ability to work through these things as you get more experience in your career.
So I grew up in Park City, Utah, and I moved to Los Angeles when I was 23, 24, I think like early 20s. And it was a big culture shock. But I think one of the things that I appreciate about that move is it stretched me in a way I wasn't expecting because now I'm in this global city. There's every type of person from every country, any type of food, all of these different experiences. Whereas when I lived in Utah, it was a very narrow lens of the world. And I don't think people need to move to a different city to get that experience. But I love that feedback on gathering as much data points as you can. And you do that by being interested in people.
Yeah, I mean, and this is very easy to do. You go on a trip to the airport, and a lot of people will take that time and they will sit on their phones and or they'll be in a conversation with the person they're with. But if you could just kind of, even at any age, just start watching people in an airport, you can learn so much about how people move through life, how people travel, how stressed they get when they have too many pieces of luggage and or they're told that they have to take stuff out of their luggage. Like, how do they respond to that? And those are all data points that you're gathering about human interaction.
I feel like you're talking about extreme people watching. It's like people watching, but how does it leverage my career growth? And
Yeah. You don't realize that that is coming in to play for the most part, but I think if I really were to look back at how did I start at 22 years old sitting in a boardroom with people that are worth billions of dollars and convincing them to make decisions on major expenditures in their company, I think that's probably a big part of it is being able to understand them in a way that gives you comfort talking about what you're talking about with them.
well, I liked your comment about when we're talking about multi-generational transactions, which is what everyone's in their careers. I appreciated your comment about everyone has something to learn from them, even if it's someone who's, quote unquote, inexperienced or younger or more junior, because ageism happens both ways, as we know. I really liked your point because I think it's a great takeaway is you can learn something from anyone, even if your opinion going into it is that this person's inexperienced. What am I going to learn
Right.
from them?
Right. If you approach life that way, you're going to advance in everything you do. You're going to have healthier relationships at home and professionally, and you'll have more success in whatever it is you're trying to achieve in the workplace. Ageism is a thing, and overcoming that is really just to kind of boil it back and realize why you're there and, what's the common ground. And there always is common ground. You just have to look for it. I think we get caught up in our own insecurities. The younger person gets caught up in being insecure that they're younger and inexperienced. And then the older person is feeling insecure because this younger person knows all this technology. I mean, my partner, he didn't even have Excel spreadsheets. He was writing on graph paper, building financial models on graph paper. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to think about it that way. But he's in his 60s and he's adapting. He's using Google spreadsheets and he's on WhatsApp. And once you overcome your own insecurity, you actually learn something from the younger person. Like, oh, this is how I can use technology to make my life more efficient. And I should not be insecure about that. And I don't need to be insecure that I didn't build financial models on graph paper. So he's way better at back of the napkin math than probably I am.
Right. That's a great point. And I think it speaks to the thread of this conversation. That's a different data point as well. So you have, data points from how people interact as just humans, data point on diversifying your knowledge of just different people and how they operate, and then embracing that diversity. You had said something really powerful about if you hire the same people that are all like you miss the opportunity for a much greater opportunity because you can only see the lens in which you're viewing. And if everyone's seeing the same lens, how are you going to think innovatively? How are you going to get to that next chapter? What you're leaving with us is some very powerful takeaways on how to kind of view the world as a whole, and then obviously how it impacts your sales capabilities.
Right. Making decisions is a big part of that, right? I mean, you don't want people who process things exactly the way you do because you need diverse ways of thinking and making a decision. And so if you're selling to someone, you don't want to just be having a carbon copy of yourself as part of your sales team. You need someone who might think about it differently because each person you're coming up against might process it like someone else on your team. And also you can learn from them so that then you can apply that when you're in front of that type of person. The simple analogy is we don't want to be in an echo chamber of our own intellectual and political ideas. We want to be with a diverse thought leadership group of people that can help us think differently and see things from different angles.
Because really, at the end of the day, your customer isn't going to be just like you
No.
either. And so, if you're not able to flex to the customer, then you're inflexible, you're impenetrable, you're not going to get the business because you aren't able to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, and look, there's people who can hit really high targets in their transactional world by just selling to the people who are just like them or love the same sport as them and they just milk that for everything they've got. But you're in a niche, you're like ultra niche. And so then you're just limiting yourself and your opportunity. The more you can widen the lens and how you see the world and how you learn and get various data points, and then you expand your team to complement that, there's more opportunity to be had there.
When I think about opportunity, I feel like a project could hit your desk tomorrow and you could quickly decide, is this something I want to take on or not? Because of how your career has progressed based on all of these different things you've collected.
Right. I didn't start out in renewable energy and I'm in it now. And I
Right.
wouldn't have planned that. But I put myself in a situation where I had a ton of different opportunities coming in the work that I was doing. And you have a diverse set of experience doing various types of transactions, and you can kind of bottle it all up and apply it to this. But if you put yourself in a box, which in some cases there's career paths that makes a lot of sense. But if you're in this sales oriented world in your professional space, I think it's
Mhm.
really important to not do that. Then you have more opportunity. Like a lot of people, I think in their career, they get to a certain point and they think, well, I don't know what else to do because I've only been doing this. And I really would love to do that, but I didn't lean in on this or that because I stayed in my lane.
Mhm.
And my advice to people is if you aren't someone who is a super routine creature and you don't want to just stay in that box forevermore, you think you might want to branch out into this or that, then expand your lens a little more.
I feel like you just described going with the flow, this concept of going with the flow. But I think when people hear that phrase, they almost think it's being waffling in the air. You don't have a plan. It's like you can have a plan and an intention of where you want to go, but you almost have to be flexible enough that if the right opportunity, that river takes you, you can go with the flow over there.
Yeah, and this really comes back to constantly keeping your options open in terms of the relationships you're building. Like you said, whether you're talking to the doorman or, the cashier, whoever it is, you never know how that is going to play into your life. It may not be obvious. That conversation you had with the cashier who told you a story that was very personal just because you caught them on a day that they wanted to talk about it. You then have something that's tangible when you connect with another person that has a very similar story and be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. I just heard something so similar. They're going to see this doctor for this type of thing." These are all things on how you may not expect your life to kind of come full circle. I mean, my partner now is somebody whose son I used to work with, and he was also my client. He was my client as a CEO of a public company for over 10 years. I was his investment banker. We did several transactions for his company. When I left banking, you would think, well, I'm probably done with that relationship. And then someone came to me and said, "Hey, I'm looking at a renewable energy project in Europe. I'm trying to figure out how to structure the debt and equity." I said, "Well, I know how to do debt and equity, but I'm not the solar development expert. My former client is. Let me call him." And we hadn't spoken in a few years, but that's an example of a relationship that you think you're kind of all right, I'm done with that relation. Not that you wouldn't want to see them or say hi to them. You don't think you're going to be in a working environment with them ever again.
And now you guys are business partners.
Traveling to Bulgaria together, I mean, it's crazy. So people who want to have an interesting career should just not take for granted any opportunity they have to build a relationship with someone.
Would you put relationship building skills as the most critical?
Oh, yeah. What's also really interesting about my partner is my father passed away when I was working on one of his transactions. And I already found him to be above and beyond many of my other clients who were in the C suite because he had the opportunity to take options that would make him a lot of money, but wouldn't necessarily take care of his team. And he always optimized for the right scenario that would do the right thing by his employees and his entire team. And when my father passed away, he's one of my only clients that wrote me this incredibly long, very heartfelt email just saying, listen, I lost my parent and I understand what that feels like. And want to let you know that I understand and I am offering you empathy. And it wasn't anything complicated, but something like that just tells you that's the type of person I really want to work with. And I enjoy that they're my client. And then when I got this call about this opportunity, I could have called a lot of people that are in renewable energy, but I chose him because he's a good person and he's incredibly experienced in this field. So I think it's a great example of you could work with somebody on one little small transaction and you just have this connection. And then, who knows, 10 years later, you're working with that person on something else.
I have goosebumps from that story because I think about, it speaks to his character and integrity, but it also speaks to you recognizing and valuing that. So now your values are aligned. I'm sure he's so grateful. He didn't write that email with the expectation that in 10 years from now, you were going to call him and be a
Oh,
business partner. He wrote it because he's a good person and he
yeah.
cares about you and a little ounce of thoughtfulness. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear about your father too.
Oh, thank you for that.
Sure you got a lot of your skills from him and your ability and interest in people from your family. And I love what you shared with us today. Is there anything else before we wrap up that you'd want to leave the audience with?
No, I just think that don't get discouraged. I think one thing we didn't touch on is rejection. And in
Mm,
sales, you deal with a lot of rejection. And I think instead of looking at it as rejection, it's just how can I learn and iterate what I'm doing? And sometimes when people say no, it's not really no because of what you're offering them. It's really no because of something that's going on their side. Like, for example, when I work in capital raising, and right now I'm raising a lot of money for my renewable energy business, you get people who kind of give you these soft no's and you realize, or they'll go down the path with you and then you kind of get like a silent period. And it's really that they don't have their capital fully committed. There's always often reasons. And so I think a lot of people, when you get into sales or anything where you're having to pitch your ideas or pitch something and you get feedback or you get a rejection, just don't look at it as, okay, I didn't do that the right way. Try to learn from it and try to understand the why. Why was it a no? And really kind of move that forward. It's just not usually as linear or binary as it sounds when people say no. There's generally a lot more to it.
that's very helpful. I think reframing rejection has something that took me a longer than I would have liked to in my career to realize that the no isn't always a personal thing.
Right.
The not taking it
Yeah.
personal. Thank you so much, Lauren. I personally got so much value out of this. I know that the audience will be very well served by it. My parents would call you a people weaver. I'm going to call you the same. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Prospecting on Purpose podcast. If you loved what you heard today, subscribe to the podcast and please rate and leave a review. For more info on me, or if you'd like to work together, feel free to go to my website, saramurray.com. On social media, I'm usually hanging out at Sara Murray Sales. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.